And welcome to another episode of the Dave LewAllen Podcast. We are on YouTube. If you're watching, listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're glad you're here for the conversation today. Now, we cover sports stories, newsmakers, and difference makers in our community and across the state. And with us today is a friend and former colleague at Channel 7 in Detroit, WXYZ, longtime reporter and investigative reporter, Bill Proctor. Nice to see you.
Dave, good to see you too.
You retired in 2013.
13, yes.
But you haven't retired. You're continuing to work, and you're continuing work that really started before you left Channel 7 in terms of seeking justice for individuals who have been wrongly convicted and imprisoned. And, there are more of those people incarcerated than I'm sure most of us can even imagine. They're there and they shouldn't be. And now this has become your life's work.
It has. And I guess I was lucky in midway through the career, I was actually introduced to a case by an investigator. The convicted man's name was Frederick Thomas Freeman, but he has adopted the Buddhist religion, and so his name is Temujin Khensu. But believe me, I spent a lot of years on the street as a reporter, essentially not knowing the full story. And I guess as a reporter, you get really lucky in that you learn on just about every story you cover, because you're talking to people who are suffering in some way, who are victims in some way, or they have something to offer someone else. And so, you have happy stories and you have those that kind of take you on this constant emotional roller coaster. Well, this one was the ultimate awakening.
And this goes back to 1995. You're a reporter, and 1995 in terms of a 5-part series on this man who you learn or believe is wrongly convicted.
His private investigator, a fellow named Al Woodside, had been knocking on reporter doors all over the region. For some reason, nobody said yes to even the conversation except me. Maybe it's because I'm an ex-police officer, I don't know. But if somebody's going to say, okay, they made a mistake here and the man is doing life in prison, I will at least listen. Well, he started me listening in 1993. So it took us many months before we got on the air. So by the time I was sitting in front of one of Channel 7's cameras telling the story, I was fully immersed in the notion, in this case, the fact that this man could not possibly have physically done this crime. I don't care what clown show the prosecutors put on, but Robert Cleland was the prosecutor in that county at that time. He ended up on the federal bench until he retired here not too terribly long ago. But it was an incredibly egregious demonstration of just how much the criminal justice system bends to formulate/fabricate the truth for a jury, and in some cases convinces a jury, never mind all of the defense evidence, never mind in this case that there were 11 or 12 people who took the stand to say no. When Scott Macklin was killed in November of 1986.
In Port Huron?
In Port Huron, on the campus of the community college there, 9 o'clock in the morning. So broad daylight shotgun slaying. Mr. Khensu, at about the same moment, was getting out of bed in Rock, Michigan, about 20 minutes outside of Escanaba. And within a couple of hours of that day, he and his pregnant girlfriend were in Escanaba face to face with a bunch of people in stores, getting receipts, that kind of thing. So the time and distance between the snow-covered Michigan all the way over to Port Huron and back, in a car would have been 10 hours. Yes, he could have caught a plane, as the prosecutor speculated, had no proof of. Yet this jury apparently just came to the conclusion, first 6 said no, and then I guess the other 6 convinced them to convict this man of a murder that was physically impossible. In 1986, the claim was, okay, he caught a private plane clandestinely flying off of farmland, flying into another bit of farmland without FDA detection. Wait a minute, that's not the FAA detection. Never mind the fact that this is a military state where our air zones, our travel zones by air, are monitored constantly by the military.
Oh.
Anyway, I could be screaming all day about the various elements of that particular case, but it was Al Woodside and the very good deep dive work that he had done on witnesses, on people that had not been called, putting together scenarios that the police claimed that were ridiculous, stupid, arrogant. I mean, just so many really bad adjectives. But the real bottom line is Temujin Kensu could not have done the murder.
And yet, he was convicted, sent to jail,
to prison for life.
And is still there to this day, yet you continue to believe he is innocent of this crime.
He is innocent. I'm the person, when I was at Channel 7, who managed to orchestrate for him a lie detector test given by a retired Michigan State trooper, polygraph operator, who was highly respected, Chester Romotowski. And in the prison, we went in with a camera with the polygraph operator, and while we were there, he gave him the test, and you will see Chester on camera from the reports back then saying, this man didn't do the crime. So there are so many levels of proof, so many high-level people in law, all the way up to the former Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, who reviewed this case, read every single word of the transcript, and on multiple interviews said before he passed away, we're talking about Thomas Brennan, by the way, Chief Justice Thomas Brennan, who was the creator of the Cooley Law School, and said, had he been sitting on the bench, there would have been an immediate directed verdict, and he would have sent Kensu home. So, I mean, it's not just a bunch of advocates. It's not just investigators. It's somebody in law who read the trial transcript and said, this was a horrible tragedy.
So, but in 2010, he was going to get a new trial, right, as I understand it. But then that was overturned, and to this day sits in prison still?
He's had at least 2 federal judges look at it. That was Denise Page Hood back then. So she became chief federal judge in downtown Detroit. But of the multiple accusations in his motion, in his habeas motion, she chose 3 to highlight as being good reasons for a new trial. And she said if he didn't get one, she was going to release him. Well, another barrier to truth in the justice system was created by the federal government after Timothy McVeigh and company blew up the Oklahoma federal building.
Yeah.
And it was created under Bill Clinton and a conservative Congress that created this time-limited structure. I believe it's called the AEDPA or something to that effect, but it's an anti-terrorism statute that doesn't allow people the time to go to federal court to prove their innocence to get to another trial or some action because they are innocent. And of course, Clarence Thomas is one of those who here recently reaffirmed that particular law, even made it worse. But the government works on its own time, clearly its own dime,
Right.
and they have so much money, so much time, so much power that a claim of actual innocence normally takes 11 years on average.
Wow.
To get any action whatsoever. His is the ultimate injustice in that there's plenty of information and evidence that should we put that same jury in the same courthouse, I'm sure they would say not guilty.
So this case got you started down this road. And in the years since, you have investigated, you have reported on, you have worked for and on behalf of others who are incarcerated. There are cases where, your efforts with others too have freed some individuals. But as you say, on average, 11 years to get to that point?
Just to be heard.
Just to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
How many people have been exonerated, in recent times? Do we know any numbers there? And or maybe more importantly, how many people are in prisons that were wrongly convicted? That whether it be, by accident, if you can, or intentionally looking the other way, or bad work, investigative work and policing work, how many people are locked away wrongly?
In the United States, the average prison population hovers around 2.2, 2.3 million individuals in the United States. The conservative estimates say 1.5% of that number is in fact actually innocent. The more educated, who understand the system and how much misconduct has been hidden, seem to think that the real number is somewhere between 6 and 8%. 6 and 8% of 2.3 million.
Wow. That's a lot of lives being wasted.
All the tax money going into the incarceration, the tax money lost because they're not employed, the suffering of the families taking loans out on houses if they have them, finding money, throwing it at lawyers who don't do work. It is a horrific hole. I've looked at hundreds of cases over my time frame, and I have 14 people who are free from elements of the system because of some element of my work. And just so everybody understands, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just one of the cogs in the wheel, sometimes the front cog, in that as an investigator, I can provide information for lawyers or law schools or advocates to essentially take next steps. So all of my 14 lawyers were face-to-face with judges to essentially do the reversal.
Right.
I'm happy to be able to say that it wasn't just the work that advanced this whole space. Quite frankly, I feel confident in saying that in 1995, I set in motion a whole lot of what exists today. The state of Michigan has 5 conviction integrity units in 4 counties, and then the state has its own conviction integrity unit. I don't think those things would have existed had I not been pounding the table on television over decades, over a number of different cases,
right.
essentially letting everybody know, look, these are not mistakes. These things happen because of police misconduct, because prosecutors want to push the envelope on charges, because judges sit on their hands and go through the process because they know they have to face all these people the next time around. And so they work in this little triangle that essentially is closed off to reason, closed off to truth, and essentially what they do is tell lies to get convictions.
And in that case, justice is not served.
It's not served because a lot of the people I just mentioned have immunity.
Yeah.
The police end up getting sued, but it is the counties and the cities and the state that end up paying the damages. And that's what a lot of people need to know and understand. These aren't just screw-ups that end up sending people to prison. When somebody is found to be actually innocent, the state of Michigan and many other states, I think maybe 26 in the country, have conviction integrity units and laws that say somebody proven to be wrongfully convicted will be compensated. The compensation runs from $30,000 for each year to $100,000 for each year. The state of Michigan is stuck on 50, but guess what? It's already putting a horrific strain on the budget, and that's your taxpayer dollars going for the mistakes, arrogance, lies, misconduct of your police departments. People need to step up and say, this should not happen. I don't want it to happen again.
And you're sounding the drum, beating the drum for that.
Yes. And actually, it's more than that now because I can lay claim to, you won't find it written anywhere, but the University of Michigan Law School has an innocence clinic.
Yes.
So it is a teaching modality for their law students.
And in part, that was formed because of
Ken Sue's case. Right. Yes. I literally had lassoed Dave Moran, who at the time was the number 2 person at the law school at Wayne State University. I chased Dave long enough, hard enough that he said, oh no, I got to get rid of this crazy guy. He's going to drive me nuts. I'll never be able to teach a class. So he picked up the phone and called Bridget McCormack, who was at the law school at Michigan. And so we had lunches and dinners, and I took her away from her kids at 7 o'clock at night so we could have coffee and discuss next moves. Because the two of them were sitting at a table together looking at a crazy guy, they said, oh no, we got to do something here. So she convinced Dave to leave Wayne State University. Dave was always thinking he wanted to do a clinic in this space because Wayne State couldn't afford it.
Right.
They got together, created the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic. And over their 10 or 11 years of existence now, they have over 40 individuals that they have freed based on their work. Some of those cases are mine.
Oh.
So I feel good about the fact that, yes, we've done all this work up until today, but as of tomorrow and going forward, as long as the University of Michigan Law School exists, the fight will continue on a very important level, which is young lawyers getting to know what wrongful convictions look like in actual cases.
And I want to talk a little bit more of some of the specifics of either bad policing or intent, things of that sort. But a couple of the other cases that you've been involved with over the years,
Sure.
Let's touch on those. Devontae Sanford, for instance. Cliff Notes, take us through that case, your role, but more importantly, the case itself and what outcome resulted there.
On Detroit's east side, Runyon Street was kind of a famous place where you could go and buy your marijuana. Nobody knew that the house on Runyon Street was actually run by a Detroit city employee who grew plants in his basement, who had customers. He, unfortunately, was well known enough that competing drug dealers wanted him shut down. So the competing drug dealers found themselves a hitman, paid him $5,000 to go to Runyon Street and kill everybody there. 4 people were shot to death on Runyon Street. 1 person survived. Devontae Sanford was 14 years old and at home in his pajamas, should have been in bed that night, but he walked out of his house around the corner a couple of blocks to Runyon Street, stood at the edge of the yellow tape and told a police investigator there, I know what happened here. He didn't know a thing. But he was a neighborhood knucklehead.
A kid.
Kind of growing up to be a thug. I'm sorry. No way to get around that.
Right.
So he gave the police some names. And the police, in what they normally do, took the names and went and found the individuals, asked them questions, and what Devontae Sanford told them was, no, what's he talking about?
Yeah.
Well, the bottom line is that the level of police misconduct in getting 14-year-old, 60 IQ, blind in one eye Devontae Sanford convicted was a high-ranking person in homicide who essentially did interviews and created facts for Devontae to sign on a document that looked like a confession. That person, it took years, but that person eventually was confronted by the Michigan State Police for the veracity of statements, where they really came from, and he had to admit under oath, yeah, I drew that. So what happened was a teenager of diminished capacity from a bad neighborhood got sent to prison and suffered mightily.
Yeah.
And so what did that cost? 9 years of his life, the embarrassment of a number of police officers, including the entire homicide division of the Detroit Police Department. The guy who drew that map and had Devontae Sanford sign it lost his job as a police chief in another jurisdiction. And over the 2 lawsuits, Devontae Sanford has received almost $8 million taxpayer dollars. This is the whole picture that people need to understand, that just to close a case, just to check a box, just so a police department can say, that's our closure rate. There are people on the inside with badges and authority who do things they should not do, which is grab the first person they can get their hands on, create stories for prosecutors, and the prosecutors take them in front of judges that really have no way of knowing anything except what they are hearing at the courthouse. And that's the problem. So yes, Devontae Sanford, 14, sent to prison as an adult, given decades in prison, walked out in about 10 years, and continues essentially to suffer from his history, but he has the money, and never mind, he does things like go in the newspaper and say, okay, everybody who wants gas today, go to that gas station, I'll pay for it. I mean, it's that kind of thing, and he's had his own troubles. All right, so that's one. There are many others.
So the fact that those situations occur on the inside of police departments with those sworn to serve and protect,
yes,
that is beyond disturbing. And yet it happens, as this case, among others, certainly proves.
The reason I'm writing a book, and it could be called Truth Be Damned, it could be called Seeking Justice, it could be called Where Truth Goes to Die, and those are difficult thoughts. But what people have to understand is that as wonderful as our Constitution is, as we read of rights that we all have and are granted under the Constitution as being Americans, the fact of the matter is the wonderful words are interpreted and applied by human beings. Human beings are flawed. I don't have to look up a dictionary or get some verification of that fact. We all know the flaws of human beings. Right. And just because a human being is given a badge to be a cop, earns a P number that is a license to practice law, or to go so far as to be elected or placed on the bench as a judge. These are all people. And when police at the beginning leave out facts that are exculpatory, that is, reasons that you can't charge, shouldn't charge, it wouldn't be fair to charge, exculpatory evidence, if that's left out and the cop is standing in front of a judge with a request for a warrant and the 6 reasons why the person couldn't do it is not presented to the judge, then that's what friggin' happens. And the judge says, here's your warrant, and the warrant means an arrest. The arrest means taking your information to a prosecutor, and once again, if the cop doesn't tell the prosecutor everything, the prosecutor goes forward with charges that may not be warranted.
Right.
I'll choose one of the cases from Flat Rock, Michigan, where a young drug dealer, Jesse Cabrera, was shot to death at night doing a drug deal. His body left in a second-floor apartment in a complex. A fellow happened to be there and watched an individual that he knew walk into the apartment where the murder took place with another person that he did not recognize. And that person was able to tell the police department, I saw Henderson, and I can use his name because he was convicted and his appeal failed. But a fellow named Henderson, and that he knew, walk in with another guy that he didn't recognize. He told the police this when they started to investigate the crime. And because there were telephone calls, because there were conversations, because there was a knowledge, because there was an association with another fellow named James Shepard, the police concentrated on James Shepard because he too was a drug dealer. Okay. But if the witness told the police from the very beginning, I don't know the second guy, it wasn't James Shepard, that's number 1 red flag, right? Well, guess what number 2 red flag was? Mr. Shepard, on that particular day, from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 3 o'clock in the morning, which covers all the hours before and after the murder, he was able to demonstrate with witnesses and employers that he was working at a Ford plant in Dearborn, miles away from Flat Rock, Michigan. Guess what? Those employment witnesses came to trial, testified in Shepard's behalf, and they still convicted him. So, look, it is a matter of what police know, what they hide, what they think they can prove, and what they walk down the road as being fact that is not. It's a lie.
And the motivation typically is
Close
to
the case.
close a case.
Close the case. Close the case.
Be able to put this behind us.
Yeah, and move on to the next one. And quite frankly, there's no doubt that government agencies are overwhelmed and underpaid, and the individuals are responsible for stacks of cases where the case should be one or two at a time. Yeah. Okay, you understand that. But why ruin a family's life, an individual's life, a community's existence by doing this kind of thing? And the answer is nobody has ever answered that question for me.
Oh. Thus the work that you do and continue to do. You've got Seeking Justice on your cap. You've got a website, you do this work in conjunction with others. You do this work yourself. You are licensed as a private investigator. You hear from, I'm sure, a lot of different people, attorneys, from families, right, reaching out because you are a visible guy, given your career and your history. People feel they can come to you looking for help if they feel that they have a case, that they have a family member, someone who's been wrongly convicted. I'm guessing that happens frequently.
It does, and it has over the years. A lot of the stories I did at Channel 7 actually came from the knowledge that I was at least listening if somebody raised their hand to say, I'm in here for something I didn't do. So Lorinda Swain was one of those, and I forget what county it came out of, but she was sent to prison for 25 to 50 years for molesting her two adoptive children. That wasn't true. She, free after a number of years, $1.9 million settlement.
But you don't get those years back. You may get compensated now because laws have changed in that regard, right? And there is some compensation, but even if it's $1 million, you don't get those years back. You don't get that time back.
No, and the people that you lost while you're in prison, you don't get to go to funerals. You don't get to say goodbyes. You don't get to be there for the birth of children. There's a lot that's lost.
Ray Gray, another case.
Incredibly egregious. The robbery of a drug dealer in 1973 in an apartment in Detroit. Ray Gray just happened to be dating the wrong teenager. She came to Ray's house that night while Ray was actually doing a young woman's hair. Ray was a very talented individual, early 20s. He was a hairdresser, maybe without a license, but he did such a good job that he got a lot of customers. And that night he had a customer. He was working on a girl's hair. He also was an amateur boxer who at that time had already won 5 different amateur championships and was about to turn pro. And he was an incredible artist. So he had 3 levels of future laid before him. That night, the girlfriend came over, mad at him about something, introduced him, or maybe not, to a couple of guys she was with. And those 3 people, not Ray, Ray stayed to do his work and was there with his family. They went to the apartment, did the robbery in front of some other women and children, and a scuffle broke out between Reuben Bryant, the drug dealer, and he was shot and died there on the apartment floor. The 2 men responsible for that robbery, one was about 6'3", 4'5". The other one was about 5'8", about the same size as Ray. Had done this kind of thing over and over and over again. They were in the system. Their names were given to the Detroit Police Department. 2 people did the robbery. Only one was convicted. It was Ray Gray,
who wasn't
there.
Yeah. And how long did he serve in prison?
48 and a half years. And then the Wayne County prosecutor made him plead to something just to be a good person and let him out of prison with no compensation. His plea killed the possibility of compensation.
But he was out.
As of May
But
of 2021, and he is still out, and he's been waiting still. We were fortunate enough to get him a showing of his art at a place called the Congregation in Detroit. It's a really nice venue. You should take a look at it. But yeah, Ray is just a prince of a person in his 70s. He's married to the woman he's been married to for 30 some odd years, and they just bought a house, and they're fine. But their ability to live and live comfortably has everything to do with the fact that his wife, while he was in prison, had 2 accidents that almost killed her.
oh my goodness.
So she had settlements to get money so that they can live a reasonable life as senior citizens. So yeah, these are
But 48 and a half years lost.
lost.
I mean, if that doesn't hit people heavy, right, that this can and does exist, well, I don't know.
Well, it's because most people are separated from this space in our government. And until they get a speeding ticket or until there's some ordinance violation where a police officer is knocking on the door with questions,
Right.
they really don't know. And quite frankly, they don't have reason to care. But I'm trying to make them care so that they understand that the police departments that they are paying are failing them and then costing them money because misconduct, lies are at the center of a lot of the work of certain police departments with bad actors with badges.
Thus, the important role of journalists, whose job it is to, bring light, to pay attention to hold people accountable. And you've done some of that work. Others do that work, but clearly there's a continued need for that oversight and that work, whether it be by journalists or advocates, others like yourself now who, are going to make sure that cases of individuals wrongly convicted are heard.
It is actually kind of a two-edged sword because you think you get the story, you tell the story, action will follow. No. No. I did that story on Kinsu in particular in 1995.
Right.
Never mind the levels of proof, never mind the study of learned, licensed people in the space who said their evaluation means new trial, if not complete release. They said it. I didn't say it. We did the interviews. We put them on. Not one person in government went to talk to Judge Brennan after those interviews. Not one. Because they have their own framework for doing things. And if it doesn't fit their framework, they don't move. They feel that they are entitled, empowered not to move.
So how does that change?
I think a lot of people are going to have to get on board with forcing change that really can be articulated by learned organizations like the Innocence Project out of New York. I can call Barry if somebody in the state of Michigan said, okay, we are putting together essentially a team, and we would like you to tell us what the criminal justice system in America needs to do to change for the better, for more accurate processes and procedures, to guarantee that lies stop, to punish those who now have immunity and never get punished. I mean, there are people all along the arc of this misconduct that I know about who've been promoted, who retired, who bought cabins in the country, whatever. And they went on to live their lives while they have ruined the lives of not one or two or three, but dozens. And that's what we find out over and over again, that the misconduct demonstrated in one case means a pattern. So yeah, it's terrifying.
So this work can be difficult. It can be expensive. You do the work, others do the work. There's got to be support and funding for these types of things. I mean, it's one thing for a family to call up and say, hey, it's another to put the time in, whether it's the the Innocence Clinic, at U of M in the law school, whether it's you working, individually as you do. Is there enough support, to get at, the problem that we have in terms of this? I'm thinking not.
It's a very good, important question, and you're exactly right. If you put up a list of 100 charities that are known, that are certified in some way, like with a government 501c3
Right.
certification, so if somebody gives money, there's a tax benefit. If you put 100 up on the board and you listed wrongful convictions as number one, hoping that people would go through the list and maybe see that first, no, there aren't very many people writing checks to help reverse a wrongful conviction, because there is still the notion that if you find yourself in prison, you did something to put yourself there. It doesn't matter if they got this one wrong. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
If we call ourselves Americans, we should call ourselves Americans living, working, and honoring the Constitution. The Constitution says it takes an entire process and a conviction to put someone behind bars. You don't punish for speculation.
Mm-hmm.
You don't punish for unproven crimes. You don't punish for what somebody said somebody did, or the drug dealer that the police know he is. Put together the information, take it to court, get a conviction. That's when the punishment starts. You can't just grab up a drug dealer and say, either you help me with this homicide or I'm going to put it on you. Ask George Clark.
Mm-hmm.
He and his co-defendant both went to prison for 20 years, and their alibis were so steady, so constant, so known to police from the very beginning, that when a cop in Inkster, Michigan told George, either you help me with this or I'm going to put it on you, that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
And so now George has been paid the first couple $100,000,
Oh.
and now the suit is for $10 million. People need to understand this is not something that people just get swept away
Wow.
and all of what is their lives and their families' lives wasted. This is a time in our history when finally compensation is at the table for the wrongdoings, and you're exactly right. It will never make up for all, but now all of a sudden the punishment has spread to the entire community, the tax base, the state.
Taxpayers,
Yes.
but what about those who are guilty of being a bad cop or of pinning, something on someone that shouldn't be pinned on that? I mean, who's holding them accountable? Chiefs, prosecutors, judges, it just seems like, the scales of justice in that regard, maybe from a watchdog standpoint, aren't what they should be either.
No, and those names stack up, because the very interesting thing is, from the Detroit Police Department in particular, a lot of the bad investigators in homicide have retired, gotten their retirement, and gone on to work for the state of Michigan. I'm sorry, what? And they know that, and some of their names are actually on what is known as a giglio list, where the prosecutor in a county can create a list of police officers that have made statements that were deemed to be untrue. So in other words, a liar's list. The list is only publicly known, I guess, to attorneys, but generally the giglio list is the prosecutor's understanding that cops lie.
Well, it ought to be available to police chiefs.
It ought to be, yes.
It ought to be available to, the state attorney general. It ought to be available to,
It is difficult. It is frustrating, occasionally rewarding, because when I mentioned the James Shepard
Yes.
case to you in particular, his sentence was life in prison with no parole. He walked out of prison in less than 5 years because he wrote, in a very articulate fashion with the help of a lawyer, an appeal that went to a 3-judge panel that only read it once. And it took them 3 years to advance it to action, but his document got him out of prison in less than 5 years. James didn't just get money and run. James left the state of Michigan because of what it had done to him. He now lives in North Carolina, in a big city, where he is teaching children building trades, carpentry and other kinds, through the goodwill and through the school district where he now lives. And he is doing a film with us, and he's writing a book, but he wants to warn children not to walk down the road he did, and that's his new life commitment, to keep children from doing bad things to get in trouble, if not in prison. So there are wonderful stories like that to be told. Ray continues to produce fabulous works of art that people are buying as soon as they get knowledge of them and see works that they like. George, is doing fundraisers for kids and buying them things to go to school. They don't necessarily walk away from life or contribution just because they got paid.
Well, that's a good thing. If someone wants to reach out to Bill Proctor, the work that you do, there's certainly the Innocence Clinic at the U of M. People go there. Someone wants to reach out to you, the best way to reach Bill Proctor and in line of the work that you do.
Well, my personal email address is billproctor314@gmail.com. SeekingJusticeBP.com is our advocacy website. If you want to see the extent that we went through on one case that was actually on the west side of the state in Newaygo County, you should look at WhoKilledShannonSiders.com. There are 28 different film segments in that one where we spent years. And that is actually in the hands of the State Conviction Integrity Unit. So, yes, there are cases in process. 3 governors have looked at Kinsu's case. They have not given him a commutation. There are disappointments, there are highs and lows, but I don't know. I guess at this point, I have to continue. I'm lucky enough to be 76 years of age.
We're still upright, Bill.
And still trying to get something done. I am slowing down the investigations because I do have to take time to write the book. So the book is coming. Hopefully by next spring, we'll have it published and ready for people to catch up with. But you can find me, just put in my name and it'll come up in Google, and I guess there'll be some contact information.
Keep on keeping on, brother.
I appreciate it, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you for the time here. Thanks for the work that you've done on behalf of all the individuals in these cases and the work that's yet to come.
I appreciate the time.
Nice catching up with you.
All right, sir.
Bill Proctor, my former colleague at Channel 7 and friend, joining us on this episode of the Dave LewAllen Podcast. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Share it with a friend. Like it, subscribe, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate your help in spreading the word on this one. Until next time, thanks to our producer, director, Josh Bowen, and to you for listening. Do stay safe, be kind. We'll see you next time.